having any bandwidth issues, maybe we can start turning them off, but it's awesome that all of you or most of you have your videos on. For those of you who I haven't met, hi, I'm Jenny. I'm a talent coach and really want to welcome you to part 1 of Foundations of Agile Leadership, which is why you need to focus on solving complex problems. So happy you are taking this catch-up session. 80% of leaders around you have already taken these trainings, so it's really crucial that you do understand these concepts. We are making a shift in our leadership culture here within digital retail and technology, and we just want to make sure that all of us are bringing these concepts to life and experimenting with these new skills in our day-to-day work. So here is an overview. If you want to go back, Ken, we'll just talk about some of the learning pathway of Foundations of Agile Leadership. And here we are in part 1, which is the why, just some key principles of Agile leadership, mostly theory. Today, there's going to be a lot of content. But the next part, part 2, this will be much more about the how, the practical tools and the applications. And those webinars are much more interactive. We have breakout rooms, and we've got it's the ladder of leadership, 12 stances of a leader, as well as systems thinking. So we are just doing 1 round of catch-up sessions in the next few weeks. So it would be great if you've missed any of those to register and attend those ones as well. Once you've completed all of part 2, we'll all be caught up. And after that, we will launch part 3, which is the what. So just stay tuned for what's going to happen with part 3. Today, all about the key principles of Agile leadership. We really have combined 2 webinars here, and that's why we sent you some pre-work for those videos. Kudos to those of you who watched those videos. So really, why are we here? We are here because we are establishing a new culture. We want to establish a common language around leadership in an agile environment. And that really means that we're here so that we can start living and breathing and bringing these concepts to life so that we can collaborate better as leaders, and that'll help us achieve our common goals. Remember, I'm just double checking. Okay, I'm just double checking the chat. Anyway, so I think Laura is also here. Laura is the talent coach, just to make sure we're on the right foot. So I'm going to assume we're okay. Are we okay?
Yeah. Jenny, I think we're having some issues seeing the deck. Some people are seeing it and some people aren't.
It
So
was
maybe
displaying,
reshare.
not anymore.
Not anymore? I'll restart it.
Okay, Ken, so you'll restart the deck. All right, well, I'll just continue on with just some logistics here. Like any webinar, if you have any questions, we really want this to be kind of casual and chatty. Just unmute yourself and feel free to just interrupt. Kent or myself, we love it. We love being interrupted, so don't hesitate. You can also just put up your hand, use a raise hand function, or in the comments, you can just put a C for a comment or Q for a question, and I'll be monitoring the chat box for most of the session here. Another thing is just a reminder to conduct yourself like a leader. So, as a leader, how would you conduct yourself while you're taking a training? Remove all distractions. Set your status to do not disturb. Go ahead and do that right now so you're not getting those little pings that are taking you off. With your phone, you're going to need your phone. We are going to do a Kahoot later, so you will be quizzed, so pay attention. But flip your phone down so that it's not also distracting you. Be present. Be present. Invest in yourself in the next hour and a half because this is important work, this is important content, and this will really be important for you as we move forward in our leadership culture. So it looks like our deck is all good. If you're having any issues, maybe just type into chat. Looks like we're good though. So let's throw it over to our subject matter expert, our SME, Scrum Master, Kent Brown.
Thank you, Jenny. So let's get started in the core concepts. As Jenny mentioned, this first why it's very content dense. So if while we're going through this, you're getting lost at any point, make sure you just call out, ask questions. Don't be afraid to come off of mute. The back and forth conversation I find is more valuable than me just talking through these concepts. Because if you don't understand the why, then you're not going to understand, well, why are we doing any of this? Why is any of this important? So the first concept we're going to talk about is the concept of authority. And we have this often misunderstood about what this actually means. And we often actually use the wrong words in this context. So I'm going to try to establish this new common language for us so we can actually go through it. So type your thoughts in chat for this question. What do you think are the difference between authority and leader? So what are the differences? What are the similarities? What do these words actually mean to you? So I'm going to give you just a quick 30 seconds here, and just type in chat what you think the differences and similarities are between these two concepts. So when I talk about these, I find this analogy helps, and we'll get into it more for myself. So authority, if authority is like an object, authority is like a hammer. It's something that you have or you don't have. Think of it as like a physical thing. When you talk about leadership, leadership is how you use that thing. So if authority is a hammer, leadership is about building. It's about building something new, building a community, building a deck, building a house. But that's not the only way you can use a hammer. There's lots of different ways to use a hammer. So kind of keep this analogy in mind as we're going through these concepts. So the definition of authority in this context is it's about having the ability to change somebody's behavior. So if you have authority over somebody, you can change their behavior. And something important to keep in mind about authority is it's not something you take. You can't take it from somebody. It actually has to be given to you. So if you have authority, it's not something you've gotten or that you've created for yourself. It's something that other person, the external person, has given to you. They look at you and say, I'm going to give you the ability to change my behavior, to change my action, persuade me to do something different than I am doing right now. So that's really what authority means. A lot of people, when they think of the term authority, they usually think authoritarian, which is a different than authority. So authority is the property. It's the physical thing that you have. And it's important to remember that it is given to you. So you don't actually have a choice on whether or not you have it. And you might not even realize you have it unless you're cognizant of that people are changing their behavior based off of things you do. The way you determine whether or not you have authority, it has to do with the delta in power. So when we're looking at the 5 types of power, and the 5 types of power, this comes from, I think, like the 70s, this concept of the 5 types. People have tried to update the 5 types into like 6, 7 types. But for the most part, the additional types of power just kind of fall into one of these 5 types of power. To quickly go through them, coercive power, that's the ability of taking something away. So if you, I'm just going to use this one because it's a powerful visual. In the olden days, torture was a type of coercive power, right? You could take away people's, ability to be comfortable, and people use that coercive power to get things from people. So that's kind of an example. Another type of coercive power is it could just be, I'm going to fire you, right? That's just another type of coercive power. If people think that you can get them fired or take away something from them, that's a type of coercive power. The other type, reward power, that's just the ability to give something in exchange for a behavior. So like that's a promotion, or I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you a feeling of betterment. I can give you something in exchange for your exchange of behavior. That's a type of power. The next is the position and legitimate power. This is the one that we all face just by the status of who we are in the company. So we have roles like product manager, scrum master, manager, director, people lead, practice lead, and just by having that positional that positional power, people are more likely to listen to us. And that's one we have to really be cognizant of when we're being leaders, because this one actually works against us in some regard as being a leader, because people will just listen to us by the product of that title. The next, social or referent power, as it's referred to, that's like, you're really good at the type of friends you have or the type of followers you have. This one's used a lot in social media. So a social media person, their authority is judged by the number of followers they have, and even though they might be complete idiots and terrible people, they have all this power, all this authority over how people think and behave, just because, well, everybody else listens to them, so I guess I need to listen to them too, type of thing. And the last type of power is expert, and that's actually knowing what you're talking about. And we see this power dynamic play off. The States is an amazing way of looking at this, where people have such high regards for positional and referent power that they're not listening to the experts. So they're not listening to expert power who are saying, wear a damn mask because you're going to kill a lot of people if you don't, right? And everybody's listening to the president of the United States or social media people because they think they have the power. So understanding that delta, that dynamic in power, as well as the fact that people need to recognize that power in order to give you the authority to change their behavior, is very important. And as leaders, we need to be cognizant of it. Because we have that positional legitimate power, people might listen to us even though we don't have a clue what we're talking about, right? They might assume we have, because we have positional, we have expert power, and we can change people's behavior even though it might not be the right decision.
So Kent, I think that's worth pointing out, number 3, positional powers, because that at Best Buy, then that would be both where we are as leaders, both people who are on our team. We need to be aware because people might just do what we say. But what's the risk there?
Is they might listen to us even though it's not the right decision. So just because we have this delta in power, they might actually be the expert. Like the person we're talking to might be the expert. They might have way more information than us on how to solve this problem. But because we come in with our positional or legitimate power, they might go, oh, okay, I'll just listen to you. Or they might even realize, hey, this person has reward power over me or coercive power. The delta in power is different. So even though they're the expert, our delta in power is greater, and so they'll grant us the authority to change their behavior.
Right. And then I might not be aware of that, and so not ask the questions to tap into their expertise.
Exactly. Yeah. Within the leader framework, leader style, it's about making sure we're always trying to optimize for expert power. That it should be the experts that are in control, the experts that are making the decisions, and it's not based off of something we have to be aware of as a leader is that we're not accidentally using one of the other types of power to change people's behaviors, because that's how you end up in troubles.
And the other way as well, if I'm assuming that senior leadership team people there are experts, when in fact they might not be because they're not as in touch to the day-to-day working.
They don't have all the information that you might have, right? So if you just go, a director tells you to do something exactly that, and you just do it but you're like, I don't think it's the right idea because of all these things. We need to make sure that we're as well letting them know, hey, this is actually the information, right? And the thing about power is it's the same with authority. You kind of have to give it. The only one that really is you kind of just have is expert power. Like you either know your stuff or you don't. The other stuff, it's only as powerful as people allow it to be. So if somebody doesn't recognize your title, or somebody doesn't care, I don't care if you fire me, then those power dynamics start to decrease quite quickly, right? And you see that all the time. When people get fed up with bullshit and they go, I don't care if I get fired, I don't care if I get a raise, I'm just going to tell this person what's what, or I'm going to leave the company because I'm tired of this over here, I'm going to go somewhere else. What you're seeing is that power dynamic decrease significantly. So the expert one is why it's more important.
Got it.
So now how does leader fit into all this? So we've established authority and what authority is, and it's this thing that you have, or this thing that was given to you by somebody else, somebody that you're influencing. Now the choice is, how do you use that attribute? How do you use that hammer? And what you have is what's known as authority styles. So authority styles are different ways of how you choose to use it. And I noted 3 here, but it's actually a quite long list, and there's a lot of different styles. Even within leader, there's probably different styles. But to kind of talk about the 3 that are on the screen. So leader is the one that we're trying to go to, because that's the one that's trying to make sure that experts are the ones that are making the right decisions. and that everybody can be a leader in this environment, right? Everybody can be, who's an expert should be able to lead those around them. Authoritarian, that's the one that a lot of people think authority actually means. An authoritarian is the perpetuation of the current authority structure through whatever means. So that's where you see a leader trying to make sure they hold on to the systems that keep them with authority and not letting the authority to switch and wane and transfer over time. And it could be to hold their authority, or it could be holding another authority separate from themselves. The influencer, that's an example of somebody who has authority but doesn't actually use it. So it's important to note that everybody on this call has authority. You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't already have some sort of authority over those around you. And if you're not using it intentionally, you are still influencing other people's behaviors. And they're probably just changing their behavior based off of how you behave. And you might not even realize it. So it's important to recognize you have this tool. You can choose not to have this tool. And if you choose not to use it, you're still using it. Like somebody walking around swinging a hammer, people are still moving out of the way, right? They don't want to get hit. You might not be intentionally hitting somebody with a hammer. You might not be intentionally building it, but you still have a hammer and people are changing their behaviors. So we're going to move on to the next concept to get you on why we need to make the change. So the first why was we need to start using a leader because that's going to help us going, and we'll talk more about in the Cynefin. But you have the authority, so you need to make a choice. Are you going to be a leader? Are you going to be an authoritarian, or one of the other styles? Now Cynefin. So why do we need to become leaders and work into leaders? So the Cynefin framework, this is what's called a sense-making framework. So it's not so much about quadrants or anything. Really how you use this and how you'll see leaders using this around you as you start learning this. It's about looking at your world and just understanding what it is that you're talking about at any given point. And as you start to use these concepts and using these words in your world, you're going to start to understand and categorize problems into certain sort of problem spaces. Just so you can make sure that you're solving those problems in the correct way and moving forward.
On a practical basis, the way I like to think about this is this framework helps me figure out the right approach to take in terms of the problem that I'm trying to solve.
Mm-hmm. So with this, you have 5 different regions. You have complex, complicated, chaotic, obvious, and disorder. Those are the 5 different regions. And what that means is there's different types of problems. And if you're interested in where these terms come from, so there's actually chaos theory and complexity theory, if you want to do some extended learning on that. These are understandings of problem spaces that were developed in the turn of the century. So the 1900s, I think it was around like 1930 to 1950s is when chaos theory and complexity theory came around. And then complicated and obvious are known as ordered problems. So they're what most people think of when they do problems. Disorder, the last space, that is where you actually don't know what type of problem you're trying to solve. So the things to note on complicated and obvious, that's where cause and effect is known. It's if you're an expert in the field or you've done a problem enough time, you know the solution. And it's just all about looking at it and understanding, okay, this A causes B, so I'm just going to do A because I know it causes B. Complex problems, these are the ones which we asked the question at the start. It's where we don't actually know what the right solution is. And in fact, nobody knows. Nobody's walked down this path. Nobody's figured it out. There's good ideas and there's thoughts, but you kind of need to test and determine whether or not it actually works. And this is where Scrum was developed for. This is why Scrum exists. It's about iterative development, right? That's where that term comes from, iterative incremental development. You build something, you test, did it do what you think it was going to do? If yes, continue to go down that path. If no, stop and try something else. Chaos, that's where cause and effect is not actually known. It's where you have a lot of rapid pace and a lot of rapid change. And in that respect, chaos is very much like COVID situation, where things changed overnight. All of the stuff we assumed to be true is thrown out, and now you have to redo. in these different realms, I'm going to kind of draw an analogy for you. So think of walking. So if you're walking around a track, you're just going for a walk around a track. That's obvious how you do it. You're either walking clockwise or counterclockwise. You just choose which way you want to go. Do you want to walk clockwise or counterclockwise? And it's very obvious about which path you need to take, right? There's lines in the ground. You just follow the lines, and you're either going one way or the other. Complicated, that's where things are a little bit more unknown. And if you think about it, it's like going to a new city, and you're in your house and you're trying to get to another point in the city, and you're not quite sure you need to go. So you need to go and talk to an expert. You need to talk to somebody who's lived there for a while, or go to a map, get additional resources, and draw your path along all the different routes. But if you do that route more and more often, eventually it just becomes obvious. You're going to go down this street, take a right, go down a few blocks and take a left, and you'll be at your destination. But that first time you tried it, it might be a little bit more difficult. So walking to your destination. The next complex, that's like walking in a forest in a thick fog. So you've never been in this forest before. You're not quite sure what's ahead of you because the fog's really blocking everything away. But as you take a few steps forward, you see more of the forest kind of open up, and you start to see more and more things. And you know that there's a path somewhere out there, and you're trying to get to your destination at the end, roughly, get to the top of the mountain or whatever you're trying to do in the forest. So you just need to keep taking steps forward and finding your space and thinking about, where did I come from? How is this different from there? And keep walking forward. Chaos, on the other hand, that's like trying to walk in an earthquake. In an earthquake, it's not even worth it to try to walk. Find yourself under a desk as quickly as possible. Find yourself to safety, and don't try to walk anywhere. It doesn't make sense anymore. It's the cause and effect doesn't even correlate. So it's not even about walking. It's about finding safety.
I love this, Kent, and I think it really demonstrates it for me, because if I think about when I'm coaching people and for myself, a lot of people are afraid to make change because they want to see the impact. They want to see like what's the full path, what's the beginning and the end. When really it is about something complex where you need to take a few steps, the fog might clear a bit, then you can sort of decide your next move, take a few more steps. The other thing I just pinged for me now is I never understood why people love walking around a track. Like I always see people out in the evening walking around this track over and over again. But I realize now it's because it's simple. They don't have to think about anything. They just go around and around. And so, life is complicated and complex enough. When I go for my walk, I just want to go around in one direction. So anyway, that's really neat.
I don't want to think about it. Cliff, the picture for chaos is people running for safety or hiding in huddled masses. I didn't think it was appropriate to put on here.
Yeah, the main thing is that they're acting first. They got to rush to action.
Yeah, it's a good segue into this. So the reason why it's important to understand in which problem space you're in is because you need to solve the problems differently depending on the problem space. So in an obvious, it's an obvious, you just sense what the problem is. You go, well, it's this problem. Okay, now I'm going to do this action, right? It's a clear cut, you're an expert, you know exactly what needs to do. Obviously, I'm just going to do this thing, and you do it. Versus complex, which is you probe, sense, respond. So that's where you probe into your environment. You take a couple steps forward, as we keep saying. You look around, you sense what's going on, and then you respond. Oh, it looks like I'm going down a safe place. I'm going to keep going down this path. The chaos is act, sense, respond. So if we think back to when COVID happened, the first thing we had to do was act. And the first thing it was create new communication channels, figure out how we communicate online, change up which team's working on which, get them working. And then we stopped for a second to sense, okay, are we doing the right types of things? And then keep responding. And the intent was to move out of chaos as quickly as possible and move us back into a complex problem solving space, move us back into one of the other ones. Because being in chaos, it creates great innovation, but it also costs a lot of money. Probably also what you felt when COVID hit was we ended up in disorder because not a lot of people are used to chaotic environments, and people were unsure of where they needed to be, and they thought they were in chaos at points, but they weren't actually in chaos. And a thing to note is you actually spend like 90% of your time, that's an unconfirmed stat. As I say, 80% of stats are made up, but you spend a lot of your time in disorder. So it's important, if you're not thinking about which type of problem you're solving, that you at least stop, think about it, and then move to the appropriate one. Usually why you're in disorder as well is people assume a problem is a certain type, or they have a preferred way of solving problems, and they use the wrong one for the wrong situation. So as leaders, our roles within this is to kind of set the constraints and the practices for those that we're supporting. So a constraint is a limitation on what somebody can do. So it's saying you can do whatever you want for enabling constraint. You can do whatever you want as long as you're in these areas. A practice is, how do you know what you should do? So constraints are limitations. Practices are, how do you know what you should do? A funny one that we often see, and we usually use best practice. Oh, it's best practice, best practice. And then immediately somebody says, well, what about this situation? You say, well, not in that situation. Well, it's not then best practice. It's a good practice. Good practice is you should probably do this type of thing in these types of situations. But if you get a different type of situation, you might do some other sort of action. A good example of this, I like it was with the developers, is they were trying to say how to develop Java and when you should, or not Java, JavaScript versus React and CSS, and when you should do it. And it was immediately, what about this situation? What about this situation? So they had to build out all these good practices. In the complex domain, emergent practices, those are the ones that you find through doing. And you only know in hindsight whether or not it was a good practice or whether or not it wasn't a good practice, right? It was actually the wrong thing to do. So that's where you start to create practices. And as I said, chaos is where innovation comes out. It's novel practices. It's where you have to throw everything away and try something completely brand new. And that's where real innovation comes from.
I can share, would this be a good time, Kent, to just
Yeah.
share my personal experience sort of using the Cynefin framework here. So when I was brought on to Foundations of Agile Leadership, I was simply helping, how do we convert the in-person training to virtual webinar trainings? So that's more of a complicated problem. You know, there's many ways to do this, but you know, there's some good practices we can follow and we'll get to that good solution. Now we're moving more over to how do we shift our leadership culture so that people are actually embodying these skills that we've taught out. Now we're in a complex space. And so for me, it's felt really uncomfortable because there's no obvious clear path. And I've been sitting in this discomfort, but it wasn't until I went back to the Cynefin framework and realized, oh, I moved from complicated to complex, that I could actually relax again, because I kind of could like, oh, right, I'm in the complex space now. So this is why there is no clear path, and that's okay. And one example of where the whole probe, sense, respond is, for example, the next step was, how do we get everyone to take these trainings, especially leaders who are busy like you? So I was finding with emails, you know, not a lot of response. So I tried pinging people on Teams, and that includes some of you. And I noticed that definitely I got way better responses and people were telling me they registered. So then that was sort of a new thing that I tried. This, you know, I sort of got information back sensing that, okay, we're getting more response. So now this will be an emergent practice, as in for the next catch-up sessions for part 2, I will also try pinging people on Teams. So that's just a very simple example of this at work.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is, as you learn that messaging people directly produces a good result, eventually that type of behavior moves over to complicated. So the solution in a complex domain can become part of complicated problem solving.
Right, so things move. Yeah. Paul had a comment, Kent?
Yeah, so Paul said, in chaos, new practices are not necessarily kept. They can be for the short term, immediate. So yeah, there's a couple of things about chaos in the chaotic environment, is because it's so expensive to be there, you want to move out of it as quickly as possible. But it is where new novel things can come about. And it's what you actually see a lot of times is people not keep practices they develop in chaos in the chaotic environment. And it's actually to their detriment, because all they're doing is not learning from their mistakes. Right. In a lot of cases, if you ever end up in chaos, and you'll know when you're in chaos, it's only happened a couple of times at Best Buy. So it's not something that happens often. It's one of the things, if you can ask whether or not you're in chaos, you're probably not in chaos because you wouldn't have time to ask. Like things just need to happen very quickly. You probably should actually ask at the end after you get out. We should probably keep a lot of those things because they helped us move quicker. They helped us respond quicker. So as leaders, it is an important thing that we don't just forget those practices.
Jenny Jupp also had a comment about people's reaction in terms of response for chaos.
Yeah, that's quite popular. So in the last COVID, where we actually entered into chaotic environment, and I can talk about why we entered into it here in a second, how we knew we entered it, is people are so used to their isolated problem-solving area, and that's actually part of the reason why we need to know this, is understanding that there's a more more colorful problem space out there, that if a person not introduced to this concept enters chaos, they're going to keep trying to go to their cause and effect. No, if A happens, B happens. If A happens, B happens. But you get to a point, if A happens, well, B doesn't happen anymore. And if people aren't comfortable with that break in cause and effect, that's where you start to see a lot of frustration and confusion. So helping walk them through, and this is actually what I did a lot during COVID, was the team that I was directly supporting, which was doing a lot of the messaging. I kept telling them every single day, like, cause and effect doesn't make sense anymore. We need to rewrite and identify what the new environment is, and helped move them out. And it helped to reduce a lot of that confusion, because it is uncomfortable, right? In an earthquake, people are going to be panicky. In a burning house, people are going to want to get to safety. And it's us jobs as leaders to make sure we guide them into the safest place possible, given the situation. So the last reason I wanted to mention to you before we really get into this is this complacency. And this is how we actually knew in COVID why we fell off, or why we were in chaos. So complacency, what happens is a company starts up, a new startup, and they solve a complex problem, and they become the star, the jewel in everybody's eye about the new thing in an industry. And then they've solved that problem now, the complex problem. So now they start to build systems to work on it, and they move over into the complicated domain, and they build these things, and they keep building their company to perpetuate that complex problems to solve that they did. And eventually it just becomes easy. It's, we just hire somebody, they just do the work, and they get it. But what can happen is, if you start to believe your own lies about cause and effect, and you start to think, this is going to be the way it's going to be forever, you eventually become complacent. And what can happen is the next great person that solves the complex problem comes along, and all of a sudden everything you believe to be true isn't true anymore. The best example, most relevant to Best Buy, is during the 80s and 90s, so late 80s, early 90s, there was a belief in retail that the number of stores you had determined your success. So everything in retail was measured by, Sears has 1,000 new stores, Macy's has 1,500 new stores, everybody's opening new stores, and it's all about the number of stores. And the most successful retail companies were the ones with the most stores. So if you had the most stores, you were the best retail company out there. And everybody knew, you open a new store, you're going to make money. That's just the way it is. But then we have this guy called Jeff Bezos comes along. And Jeff Bezos comes and he starts a company that starts solving complex problems. And one of the first ones they solve is, how do you create a distribution network? Another one is, how do you create an online experience that people actually want to give their credit cards to? And he starts solving a series of complex problems, him and his company. And it completely disrupts the retail industry. Like we saw this in 2010, where stores were closing, retail companies were closing left and right. And all these companies that had started to believe their own lies and had over-optimized to solving the obvious problem of opening more stores couldn't respond to the pace of change that was resulted from one or two complex problems being solved. And those complex problems dropped a ton of companies off of the complacency cliff into chaos. And Best Buy was even one of it. Back in 2012, Best Buy was probably a good couple of months away from not being a company anymore. Right? There was a lot of chaos going around. Luckily, at that point, it had leadership that could move it out of chaos and into a complex problem-solving space. And we've rallied back, and now we're kind of seen as one of the interesting companies out there doing some interesting things. But a lot of companies didn't make it. They fell off the complacency cliff and they died. And it was very expensive. Lots of people lost a lot of money. Lots of people lost their livelihoods. So it's kind of a place you don't want to be on. If you're having things on the complacency cliff, it's very easy to lose out. And how we know COVID was another one of these was the complacency that we all had was, of course, stores can be open. Why couldn't stores be open? Like, why couldn't people go into a store and buy things? Like, obviously that's would be the case. But then COVID hit, stores got shut down, businesses got shut down. You can no longer have people coming in. You can no longer fill your area to capacity. And again, we're seeing a lot of businesses go out. A lot of companies are closing down. A lot of stores are going out. A lot of people are losing their jobs because we fell off the complacency cliff of course that's going to be happening. Like, of course there's going to be stores. Of course people can go in. So when we're, as leaders, we want to make sure that we're not becoming complacent, that as things are becoming obvious to us, that we go, is it actually obvious? Is it something we can automate? Because if it's obvious, we should automate it. If it's not something we can really automate, then is it really obvious? And should we not move that problem back into the complex domain and reframe it in such a way that we can figure out what is the next most important thing to solve? Because the more things we have in complex problem solving, the more successful we are going to be as an organization and as people. If you think about it, Jeff Bezos solved a couple of complex problems, and he's on target to become the first trillionaire. So think, he solved the problem of distribution and the problem of getting people to give their credit card online, and now he's going to become on track to becoming a trillionaire. That's two complex problems. Imagine how many we can actually end up solving.
And that is such a key takeaway here, is this is the reason why we want to be in the complex problem solving domain and solving those problems if we want to keep succeeding.
Exactly. If we're the ones solving the complex problems, that means other people are falling off the complacency cliff.
And we're making trillions of dollars.
Exactly. We're the ones, Some examples, other examples of problems that should be moved into complacency that if we don't figure it out, it's going to cause us trouble. One is recruitment. So we're still having trouble recruiting people, and we started to solve it in the complex problem solving domain. We've put together a cross-functional team, but we just need to get better at it. We need to start working on it. Another one that potentially could result in a lot of harm for us is Best Buy is pretty complacent about, of course, marketing has any effect. Of course, online sales have any effect on the amount of money we're making. But that might not actually be true. Like, we've seen our sales double overnight. Is the number of sales we have, right, the sales events, is that actually having any difference? Another one is we build software all the time. Has any of that software actually had any effect on what we're doing? Do we need to rethink about how we're developing software and how we're developing features? Because are those actually solving the complex problems we want to be, or are we just creating complicated work where we're just working through to an end product, but we don't actually know if that has any effect on our future?
Simon has a comment saying he thinks the move from the physical store to e-commerce is more of an issue of having vision than complacency.
So when you're talking about vision, what you're actually talking about is enabling constraints. So a vision should be an enabling constraint. It should be something that's giving the freedom for people to identify the right solution in a particular direction. So that's an enabling constraint. Well,
Can you clarify that more? That's not so clear to me, Ken. Like, is it sort of like a safe boundary where your people can do,
like if you think
what they want?
You think our vision, it's enriching lives through technology, right? So it's saying, if we're going to do something to where it's enriching lives through technology. Don't go off and go build a bakery, right? That's not enriching lives through technology. So it's kind of giving you that constraint. We're about technology and we're about making lives better. That's the direction you want to be working towards. When it comes to a lot of companies, what they end up doing, they might have solved a complex problem at one point, and some of them, they might even have a good leadership team that can continue to solve complex problems within that executive team. But a lot of companies, what they end up doing, they start to build their systems around these complicated, obvious. People's jobs start to become about filing papers versus building a better way to manage data, manage information. So if people, they start to think, the workers, they start to think, my job is just to, when A happens, I do B. When A happens, I do B. That assembly line type of thinking, the culture starts to shift. Because if you think people are promoted from within in a lot of companies, so if you think your job is about filing papers, then as you become the manager, you're going to tell your people how to file the best papers, and it needs to be alphabetical. That's the best way to file papers, do it alphabetical. And they think, okay, my job is about alphabetically solving papers. And that's why companies don't usually fail overnight. It usually takes about 25 years for a lot of companies to fail. I think 50 is around time where they start to build their systems around obvious and complicated problems versus optimizing about continuously solving those complex problems. So when you're talking about it, it's not so much the move, it's a vision problem. It's because they had moved away from the complex problem solving space. That's what that means.
As leaders as well, would it help us to always be thinking, it almost reminds me of just thinking strategically, like bigger picture, longer term. Is that as well the same as complex?
Yeah, very much so. It's not about saying we need to do X, because we need to do X. That's very much like a fixed constraint, a governing constraint. We're going to deliver this feature. We're going to produce this item. We're going to create this page. It's about, this is where we want to get to. We want to increase our delivery, or decrease our delivery time from 2 days down to 1 day in a region. How are we going to do it? I don't know how we're going to do it. I have some proposals as a leader, but does anybody else have a better way on how we can accomplish this? And so making sure that everybody has the ability to use their brain. And that enabling constraint, it's saying this is the problem we're focusing on. Like, we're trying to reduce the amount of the delivery time of our packages, but how we get there is unknown, right? It's walking in a path in a forest. So making sure as leaders we're articulating the problems in the proper problem space, in the proper problem domain. Because if we just say, just build me this feature, just build me this thing, then people aren't optimizing for the brain, and we're not going to end up solving the complex problems. And it's going to hurt us in the long run as well as in the short run, because we're going to build up design features. Yeah, go ahead.
Don't you need some people though who do just file the paper though? Like, or do you want everyone to be thinking about complex problems?
So you want everybody thinking about complex problems, but how you solve them is by a series of short, complicated, or obvious actions. So this is where understanding which one you're in at any given point is important. So when we come to planning, or we come to thinking about what's next, that's complex. When we say, okay, we think this is the next most important thing, we're going to try building this feature. Now how are we going to build it? Well, that starts to become a little bit more complicated. But that's why we hire smart, capable adults, right? We hire them, and some of us even have a job of making sure people are smarter and more capable as we're going in, right? Practice lead or people lead or practice specialist, they're trying to build smarter, more resilient people so that they can focus on solving these complex problems. I'm losing my train of thought. I have a construction going on.
I know, I can
one
hear
of my
it.
neighborhoods.
But basically, you're talking about how as you sort of have the planning, and then as you start going into implementation, things move from complicated to obvious. But really, so then it sounds like you need people who can sort of do the obvious work, but also still be thinking complex as well,
Yeah.
depending where you are.
It almost becomes like table stakes. Is you're not at the, you should be at the, if you're at the table, you should know how to do the actual work. You figure out the complex problems, and then you're doing the actual work so that you can sense on whether or not it actually produced anything.
Okay, yeah. And then Paul's just made a comment about when you do have defined boundaries, that does allow for acceleration.
Yeah. So that's where the enabling constraint. So it's about the types of boundaries you're trying to create. So when you're looking at enabling versus governing versus fixed constraints, enabling constraints are things that are trying to help you push you forward faster. And it's defining it in such a way that you are free to work within the constraints and trying to help enable you to be better. A fixed constraint is, I'm just going to use this as an example because it is probably a little bit relevant to you. So a fixed constraint is you must have a performance metric of 500 millisecond load time. Right, so that's a fixed constraint. You have to meet this. If you don't meet this, you're off your rocker. That's a fixed. You can't go outside of it. If you don't do it, you're not allowed to release, something like that. An enabling constraint is more about we need to figure out how to increase the speed of our load time. So the enabling constraint is when you're developing anything, it should be faster than the time you developed it before. So now you're enabling them to figure out the way that they can develop something faster than the way they are before, and trying to solve those complex problems of how do we continuously develop new features without slowing down our page speed load. So that's kind of the different ways of talking about it.
Great, thanks.
So this next slide, and I'll give you some time to read through this. It's in your participant guide as well. If you want to read through it, I'm not sure which page, or if you want to read it off of here, I'll give you a few minutes to read it, and then we'll talk about it. But really, what this is talking about is based off of a leader and in which problem domain you're trying to solve, you're going to behave differently as well. So a leader doesn't always behave in the same way given the problem domain. Sometimes you need to be more direct, and sometimes you need to be more facilitated. One that often gets confused and people not realizing in which space they're in. When you're trying to identify the problem you're in, it depends what vantage point you're looking from as well. So a good example of this is in communities of practice. When you're teaching somebody about a concept, you're teaching them how to solve their own complicated problems. So that's where you're training, you're teaching. You're training the person you're working with how to solve that complicated problem so they can solve it for themselves. But you yourself are solving a complex problem in that you're trying to determine how best to make this person sitting across from me learn this material. How can I best do that? So is it through a webinar? Is it through a video? Is it through just a document? Is it through some sort of testing program? That's a complex problem that you have to probe, sense, respond. You teach something to somebody, and then you need to sense, did they actually get that content, and then respond accordingly. If they're getting the content, then you keep teaching them in that way. If they're not getting the content, you teach them a different way. They themselves are probably in the more complicated domain where they're just trying to learn to understand how to solve that complicated problem. So it's not as complex for them. And then when they learn that complicated problem, they're going to transition back into a complex problem space and solve some other type of problem. So how do we increase the percentage of traffic from PDP to checkout, something like that. So that's their complex problem they're trying to solve. How do we better maintain the stability of our releases? That's their complex problem they're trying to solve. So when we're, as leaders, we need to make sure that we ourselves have a bunch of complex problems we need to solve in order to help make sure that the people we work with have the knowledge, understand how to solve the complicated problems, to solve their own complex problems.
Very meta. So as a leader, when I'm working with people in my team, I'm also using the Cynefin framework to help them solve their own complex problems. Did I get that?
Yeah, that's kind of your point. That would be your job as a practice lead, practice specialist, those types of things. Another thing to note is being straightforward and telling people what to do is not a bad thing if you're entering the chaotic domain. So if you're entering from the obvious, you're falling off the complacency cliff, it is your job as a leader to help your people get out of chaos as quickly as possible. because if you don't, you're going to spend a lot of money, and there's a high possibility that that company is not going to exist, right? Or that area is not going to exist in the near future. And it can happen very quickly. Like, don't get me wrong. So it's very dangerous being chaos. But if you're intentionally entering from complex, you're going to have a certain different behaviors. And I do this with all my teams all the time, and we try different things. Cliff's on the call, so he's probably felt this and didn't even realize it. One of the areas you'd enter with is, I'll usually go and I'll say, let's throw this assumption away, and let's just intentionally try to solve it. And it'll be a little bit chaotic for a bit, but then we try something, it's weird, and then we enter back in the complex and we start the cyclical process on how to improve it. One of the ones that came out of chaos is the idea of, I forget the name that we called it. It was like sequential planning, where we would put up all the days of the calendar and put on each day what we planned to do for that sprint. That was intentionally entering chaos for a bit to try to figure out what type of systems need to exist, what new novel practices can we create in order to help us practice better. And then after that, we iterated on the thing that we had identified in that novel.
In the chat, Cliff has a question and Jenny has a good coaching question. Jenny's question is just wondering how other people vision applying some of this. Maybe we can give people a moment to think about that, or you can type your answers or thoughts into the chat. And then Cliff's question is, any examples of working with a team that might be both, are you saying both complex and complicated, Cliff, or which are the two domains?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and just kind of like maybe super obvious to them or yourself, even at the time, you're maybe straddling a couple of different ones, and is that even possible? I don't even know.
Yeah. So it is, but it's different. It's more of a way you looking at it. So in a complex problem solving space, if we actually designed our team to solve the complex problem of reducing delivery time, let's just keep going with that one. So reducing the time it takes to somebody to order a package, so that package to get to their house, or increasing the ability for us to know what that level is, right? Getting to 80% confidence rate that when we say it's 2 days, it's going to be 2 days. That's complex problem solving. And we're going to need to go through a series of iterations to figure out how to actually accomplish that. And that's where everybody's engaged in the brain, and nobody knows actually how to solve either of those two problems. But we're going to figure it out eventually. And so engage in their thoughts. But when you choose, let's try this, let's try some sort of action, let's try building this application, or let's try building, tweaking some numbers here, then you're probably going to go to the experts in the complicated domain, and which are on the team, and they're going to make some changes. They're going to make some differences. I'll use it as more real world. So for example, even this slide, when we were first developing this, we didn't know what it was going to take for people to understand. So we created some slides, we put them together, we said, okay, let's try something. Let's try a webinar to teach people now that we're all remote. Created it, we presented the slides, and we got feedback from the first few people that took the presentation, and then improved upon the slide presentation. So when we were building the slide deck and improving, doing that was in the complicated. When we're improving on it and trying to figure out how to make it better, that's more in the complex. So it depends on what type of action you're taking. But if we over optimize our systems for just complicated, and that's why people need to understand, what is the vision? What are we trying to go after? All those kind of systems are there so that we don't just end up in a place where people are just building things because they were told to build things. Right? People are doing things, and they're just doing the complicated problems without any context for the complex problem they're trying to solve. So in a sense, you're always in all of them, depending on what is happening at any given point. You transition around, move around. So it's all about how you frame that problem. So does anybody have any suggestions for Jenny or anything they would want to do for Jenny's question?
Yeah, I'm just more curious if people have kind of thought about like, how are you going to take this information and apply it to your work? I mean, I have some thoughts around my areas, but
What are your thoughts, Jenny?
my favorite subject, new employee onboarding. Just in terms of how we like partner with people and just make this kind of information apparent so that we're all on the same page. Like, to Cliff's question, can you be in two different areas? I think you can if you have leaders or people involved who have different levels of experience and understanding. Some can be living in complicated and others in complex because they might have less experience. But if we bring each other up to the same level when we're going through or looking at things, I think you can just move a lot faster is all.
So I'm hearing something, and it might be in the way I'm explaining it, because Paul's question has the same sort of in what you just said. So it's not about the team is chaotic or complex. It's about the problem you're trying to solve. Which problem are you trying to solve? So that's kind of when I was trying to answer for Cliff's, and maybe I'm not doing a good job of explaining it. It's not so much about can a team be in multiple. It's at what point are we what type of problem are we solving? Are we solving the problem of increasing the percentage to PDP? Are we solving the problem of building a feature to click links on the homepage, right? Because that last one is a complicated problem. Like, we know how to build a banner to get links to PDP, but we haven't really solved the problem of increasing throughput to PDP, like increasing the percentage of people to PDP. So for Paul, when you're talking about chaotic team within a complex domain, it depends on the type of problem. So like when we think about COVID falling off the cliff and no longer stores are an option, stores aren't going to be open, we need to change how we work overnight. That itself was a complex. How do we deliver an experience to our customers, or what type of experience can we even deliver to our customers during the time where there's no stores, and how do we respond quickly to that? So that's the chaotic problem. Delivering those features, now that became a complex problem. And the system we set up was we set up a series of teams, each looking at possible scenarios or possible experiences that could have where ship from store only, RP only, curbside pickup only. We created all these teams, and then those teams went off and solved the complex problems for their individual scenarios. So the complex problem is actually, our chaotic problem was very small, not small. It was quickly handled where we set up all this structure to put people back into a complex problem solving space to solve for those experiences without stores. So for a chaotic team within a complex domain, we're building it so that they solve complex problems, but there could be a chaotic problem within that team. If they're just not getting things, maybe it's not even a chaotic problem. It might just be disorder. Like, they might be in disorder thinking it's in the wrong space. A lot of times people use disorder and chaos interchangeably. So this is, again, why we're establishing this language, so we can identify when it is one or the other. But a lot of times, and this is very interesting, the idea or the concept of how to solve complex problems isn't actually a complex problem. That was figured out back in 2001 when the Agile Manifesto, where we solved how to solve complex problems. So now that's just a complicated problem. So when Scrum Masters are teaching teams, or anybody's teaching team how to work cross-functionally, they're teaching them about a complicated problem-solving space. Like, it's a known entity how to solve complex problems. And that's basically what it is you put a group of smart, capable adults, you make sure you have all of the skills you need, you make sure they have a clear purpose on what they're going to solve, and you make sure they win and lose as a team, and you make sure that everybody's needed, and send them off, and they'll go solve your complex problems for you. So it's a known entity. It's kind of interesting to think about that the problem of solving complex problems isn't in itself a complex problem anymore. We figured that one out.
We're so evolved.
Yeah.
It looks like Cliff had an aha moment too, which is nice. Thanks for sharing that, Cliff.
So are there any other questions about the Cynefin framework?
And we are about to head into a Kahoot quiz, so get your questions answered now if you're not sure.
I think the best way, Jenny, for you to use this is just when you're solving a problem, just ask, what type of problem is this? Doesn't matter where, when, just ask, what type of problem am I trying to solve? And if it's not the right type of problem, or if you don't understand how is this going to help us solve a complex problem, then get that information so you know, okay, if I'm doing this work, I better know what type of complex problem I'm trying to solve at this point. The last little bit is kind of the story. So where we are right now and how we're going to move forward. So right now, what the Y's been talking about is we've been defining the destination. So it's that area, that high hill on the far path there. And in between there and here, there's a lot of different dips. There's a lot of different peaks. Some of the peaks are going to look like the highest peak in the back, but they're not quite there yet. And we as leaders, we need to help lead the company on this journey to help us reach that peak at the back. And we're going to walk into these cliffs with fog, and we're not going to know which direction we're going, and we're just going to have to keep walking and probe, sense, respond. And sometimes we're going to come out and it's just going to be a complicated problem that we just need to, I just need to walk up to the top of this hill along this path. And that's kind of the journey we have now going forward as leaders. We need to identify, how do we get to that peak at the far side, which we talked about today. And then when we get there, we might get there and realize there's actually a higher peak somewhere off in the distance. And then we're going to start the journey all over again on continuous improvement. So that's why we're making this change. And that's why this training is important, is to understand what it's going to take to get to that peak.
It almost feels really tiring, like we're on this epic journey. But it's that classic cliche thing. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey itself.
Mm-hmm. And what we learn along the way. Very much so. So that takes us to the end. Just so you guys know, we're done part one. There's not a 1.2, as I said. We're just going to end it here for you guys. But we still have the how. So if you haven't signed up for the how yet, which is the ladder of leadership, which is going to be probably your most powerful tool. When I experimented with this one to see what its effects were, it produced anywhere from 33 to 2 times improvement. So 1.33 to 2 times improvement in productivity of the team I was working with, just by using the ladder of leadership. So it's a very powerful tool if you want to start improving very quickly. We're going to talk about the stances. So we saw in the Cynefin framework, you behave differently in each of those. And it talks about what type of stances or what type of behaviors, actions that you can use in order to produce the best results. And then the last how is the systems thinking, which teaches you how to solve complex problems and how to identify complex problems.
That's a good one. Systems thinking is a good one. Make sure if you do anything, do systems thinking, the 2.31. Yeah. And we only have them for the next 2 or 3 weeks. It's the last round before MTH. So definitely sign up. And again, they're much more interactive. We're going to send you out to breakout rooms. You do activities. So highly recommended. So sign up today if you've missed any of them.